Listen to that. Did everyone hear it?
Yes. I
Oh
think
my
it's this time.
gosh. And if I can just find it after we're done. But it is recording on this device. Okay. Some of the other programs out there in the world use this, and John C. Campbell does, Lesson Face. And so when you teach from Lesson Face, it automatically starts recording the minute the host or the instructor logs in. And so we're told, if you're just logging in to set up and get ready, turn the recording off, but you got to remember to turn it back on. So there are my girls just hanging around because that's what we do. And it's week 3 of this. So here we go, dyeing shibori fabrics. I don't know that either of you have ever been to Surratt Art Studios, have you?
I've been, but I've never dyed.
Okay.
I took a weaving workshop there last year. We had the guild, you stepped in.
Debbie's pattern workshop?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Okay. This is just a couple of minutes then of things that you might not have seen. So, and this is my playground or Candyland. And so this is the room where Debbie's pattern workshop happened. And we also teach jewelry, and I teach weaving and shibori here at the dry part of shibori. We have watercolor, book arts, any kind of drawing, painting, acrylic painting, things. So it's kind of a multi-use space. It's not dedicated to any one thing. And this is the room that Connie Leipert's wedge weave workshop will happen in. So I'm going to host that one in the studios. We have a dedicated clay space.
Are we supposed to be seeing a presentation? Because I'm just seeing your face.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? Hold on a second. Let me get out.
Thank you, Kate. I thought, well, we'll imagine.
Oh, you know what? Duh.
What?
Yeah. I forgot it. I was so excited about hitting record. I forgot to share my screen. Oh, goodness. Because usually we're going, can you see my screen? Now I am screen sharing.
Now we see your desktop.
Yeah. It's as cluttered as everything else in my world. All right, here we go. Sorry. Thank you for saying that. I would have just kept talking. And I did do that one time. I did a live thing for American Tapestry Alliance when they did studio tours. And I logged in and I just started talking. And then I realized there was nobody there because something didn't work right. So now you see the girls.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Here they come full screen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought you were referring to us.
You are my girls, at least for this next hour or so. But no, I had to introduce myself on a Zoom meeting this morning, and people were saying where they were working or logging in from, and I was like, I'm home and I'm surrounded by golden retrievers, and nothing could make me happier. So, and everybody knows me; they get it. So, all right, that's the hallway to Surratt Art Studios. I'm very sorry. I do hope you'll and this is the room that we will use, or one of the spaces we'll use for the painted warp workshop as well in July. So I love the sinks here. If I ever have my own wet area, I'm going to get those kind of kitchen utility sinks. We do, and like I said, this is the room where jewelry and a lot of other things will happen. Anything that's messy. And this has been Candyland for me. So I've learned some jewelry. I've learned fused glass. I sit in on some of the drawing painting workshops or classes. We have a dedicated clay studio. Again, there's those wonderful sinks. Somebody might be painting a warp in this room. It just depends on how much space we might need, or somebody's brought something 100 yards. But, and I can clear the wheels a little bit and set up more tables. So it's actually a nice big workspace. Just giving you a little tour. We'll end up in my die, and what I've now created as my die kitchen. And I tell people I need it for classes that I'm teaching, but ha ha ha, I just need it. It used to be my, and oh, there goes Hadley.
Gosh, you've got a big pottery program.
It is, yeah, there's 13 wheels and I have enough room for about 5 or 6 classes a week. I have, this is the die kitchen area. I've changed it around a little bit.
Now, are your students, are they Vanderbilt students?
Yes, Vanderbilt students, faculty, staff. Used to be open to the Nashville community, but COVID ended that. There's Madge, my indigo bat. And there's some yarns and things that I was dyeing. I haven't brought the Nashville community back into the program yet. Because we seem to be serving the Vanderbilt community pretty well without them. But I used to have 30 classes a week, and now I'm about 18 classes a week. And that's another reason I don't quite need them.
That's a lot.
Yeah. It's become more manageable as since COVID.
Mhm.
And I also don't have a children's program in the summer anymore. Hooray. And then we have our photo dark rooms here. So we still teach some black and white photography, which is a great, fun way to explore things visually. Because a Holga camera is like the precursor to some of these photo apps where you can just play with photos and change them and alter them as you want. But the Holga camera does even more on its own. So if you're ever like, I just need a different way of seeing, let me know and I'll get you. I can put people in who are not part of the Vanderbilt community in some of these classes, or I could do a little weekend workshop or something like that. So we have synthetic dyes first. And this is kind of leading up to the way that piece of fabric from Peru that I shared last week. I have a little video where I do my own version of multicolored dyeing with the knot technique. But just taking a look at synthetic dyes. These are fiber reactive dyes, these Procyon dyes, no matter where you get them. Dharma sells them, Plaza Artist Material sells the little jars like you see on the left. That's good for about a 1 gallon bucket of dye. I think those are 2 ounces. Because they are fiber reactive, and you may already know this, the moment they touch something that is fibrous, including your hands or your hair, it's going to dye it no matter what you do. And they just need cold water and a little salt and baking soda. So there we go. I was already saying that. I did a little research to find out who came up with Procyon dyes originally, and that was Imperial Chemical Industries. And I say that it's a chemical process. They fix chemically without heat. That's not really quite right. I may need to fix that line, because if it was chemical, then heat would be involved. But we do talk about dye chemistry in no matter how we're doing it, and our recipes for you doing it and everything. These are the dyes we'll use for the painted workshop, and we're going to be using the direct painting technique. the key word to remember always is fiber reactive. We do have a long shelf form as long as they're still in powder. I was taught originally that once you mix them with water, they could exhaust themselves overnight. But I have found myself that that's not true. And I've even used what would be considered an exhausted bucket of dye later than, or longer than 10 days later. But the nice thing, and people were all about these when I was in school in the 90s, was because you consistently get the same color and that they are permanent and light fast, as opposed to natural dyes and some other processes. So I think the public kind of got annoyed with buying bed sheets that were naturally dyed and then they faded to some other color or version of itself. And so these kind of became the answer to that. Now everybody wants to do natural dyes. And you'll hear people say that Procyan dyes are not safe for the environment, and that's not true. But how you dispose of and where you're disposing of whatever's left over is what you have to be careful of. Here in the city, I don't have to worry about it. If I was on a well, or my studio was near a creek or a river, then I would be more concerned about it. I'm not a chemist. I remember a little bit about molecules. I'm just sharing this, that a fiber reactive dye molecule is kind of complex. And the reason I'm showing you the complex is because when we look at indigo, we'll see how simple it is compared to this molecule here. So something happens in the dye process where these molecules are encouraged to bond to your piece of fabric. So there's that, are they safe? And so they don't have the heavy metals or toxic substances like I would have to be concerned with in a pottery studio. And I don't know if you've done clay or not before, but a lot of glazes used to use lead. And then we found out that lead can leach anything kind of acidic. So a fruit tray on an old, what's that Mexican dinnerware, fiesta ware. If you have old fiesta ware and you just put slices of oranges on it, the lead from the glaze can leach into your food, and then you're ingesting the lead. So Procyan dyes do not have any of these heavy metals or toxic substances. And some of the mordants that are used in natural dyeing are heavy metals. So you just kind of have to watch and think about what you're doing. So Procyan dyes took some of those questions and those toxic things out of people's studios. There were other things that they were doing wrong with them that made people sick possibly, but I'm not going to go into all that tonight. So here's a little list, and you may already know this, of things that you will need for dyeing your fabrics with Procyan dyes. I have soda ash in my studio, but baking soda is the same thing. It's just half the strength. So if you find yourself in a jam and you have no soda ash and you started dyeing, you can do one of two things. You can rush to your kitchen and get your baking soda and just double that amount compared to your recipe. Or you can just take a deep breath and go, it's fiber reactive dye. I don't really need the soda ash or the baking soda. And I will go ahead and admit that I have forgotten to put the baking soda and the salt into my dye baths, and I still got the dye color that I wanted. What happens is, if you think about and why we add these two ingredients to a Procyan dye bath, if you think of your piece of fabric as a parking lot, and the molecules of the dye are the cars driving around the parking lot looking for a space to park. And we've all been behind that person who just can't seem to find a parking space and get out of the way, like Christmas at the mall or whatever. The salt energizes those dye molecules so that they hurry up and find a place. And then the baking soda or the soda ash tells them to not change their mind and find another parking space, to stay in that space. And so, and that, with all the different ways people have talked to me about dyeing, that's the one. Beth Ann Knudsen shared that with us when I was in school, and that has always made sense to me. But like I said, they will do their thing without those ingredients. And I'm not the only one who's forgotten to put the salt and the baking soda in.
What did you say the salt does? Does the salt say hurry up and find a space?
Yes, get out of my way, little slow person in the big Cadillac in front of me that's driving 5 miles an hour through the parking lot, past 5 parking spaces already. Find a space and get in there. And then the baking soda or soda ash helps them bond to the fabric. So it's more like an assist. And so I always say, well, the baking soda made them turn their car off, and now they're there. I have gloves and exclamation points and mask as well. You wear a mask before you open your jar of dye powder. And you wear your gloves as well before you pick up the jar of dye powder, even if it's your own personal jar and nobody else is allowed in your dye kitchen. And that is because you don't know what might have happened the last time you were in there. So some dye powder could have gotten on the outside of the jar, and then you go and touch it. Maybe you just wash your hands, or it's a humid day and you're sweating a little bit, and you go and pick up the jar of dye powder, and boom, you have that color on your fingers. So, but once you get the dye into water and stirred it, and then close that jar back up, you don't need the mask any longer.
So what about the plant-based soap? Does that just mean not detergent, or?
Well, it used to mean Synthropol.
Oh, okay.
Because that used to be the only plant-based soap that you can find.
Mm-hmm.
But now everybody has a plant-based detergent.
Okay.
And so I'm using what I wash my own clothes with. And then I recently learned, I can't remember if Jean Brady was up at the craft center or Rena Wood when I went to teach a workshop. They're taking a bottle and putting half of it with mild dishwashing soap and the other half water. And that's what they're washing their fabrics with. So they're watering down dishwashing soap, like liquid that you'd use at your sink, to create a milder form of soap. You just don't want anything too harsh. It's sort of like the shampoos. You've gone to the beauty parlor and spent $400 on your nice new dye color, and then you pick up the wrong spot. You use an astringent type shampoo and the color's gone the next day. That's exaggerating it, but they're shampoos that you should not use. And so some of those stronger soaps are not good for washing or dyeing. I mean, washing your fabrics with at any point, even. And if you've bought something made by an artist or whatever, then you probably want, and you're wearing it and it needs to be cleaned, I would dry clean it or hand wash it instead of throwing it in the washing machine. And I tell my pottery students the same thing: hand wash that $50 coffee mug that you just bought, because your dishwasher will eventually wear that glaze down. So you just need to be careful there. anything that I've touched or anywhere that I have been working with the dye, I spray some bleach on, and then I clean up that area. Even if I can't see the dye or any evidence of dye, I just still clean up. And I also clean my drying rack or clothesline off. And occasionally I forget to do that and then pay for it later, because the dye can still be sitting there, and you come back in next week and maybe you decide to sit on the table and talk to a friend. You don't really have anything going on, and then you get up in your nice new white shorts or jeans or got a blue or a red spot on them because there was some dye hiding there. So just use precaution through all this. Any questions here? I don't know how much dye work y'all do or how familiar you're with. So hopefully I'm not.
I've never done any, so.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, are you coming to paint your wart?
No, I'm gonna be in New Mexico for
Oh,
all.
that's right. Well, we'll have to have it. We'll have
If
to
you
have
have
it.
if you have a second, somebody said if you kept a waiting list or something, I would be interested if it was if you did another class.
There was only one other person that contacted me about wanting to do it and couldn't do it that
It's me.
day or something. Was that you?
I think it was, and Sandy Bell would like to come too, so there are two of us.
Well,
Really?
that's good news, but Sandy DeVal needs to tell me, because that would have motivated me, like putting salt into the dye bath. Because,
Okay.
now I have 3 people who might want a September or August dye
Yes.
workshop. Yes, and maybe more. So I don't know if people are scared to email me or something, but just tell her to drop me a line, because
I will.
that's how I keep organized with it. And I trust you when you're telling me that she wants to. But I like it a little more information than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can do it. The nice thing is most of it's all set up at Vanderbilt. So if we did a Saturday or Sunday, parking is relatively easy, and you don't have much to lug in.
If you set something up and you put an announcement like in the Guild newsletter, I think you'll get more, because I was at a workshop that Carol Ventura did about a couple weeks ago. And I think I think somebody there said, I can't take it in July. I wish she'd have another one. So
okay.
There may be more interest.
Yes. And like I said, I didn't, no offense, Kate, but I didn't get enough feedback to motivate me to put out another date. And
I understand.
I'm also happy just to meet the two of y'all, especially if you do your shibori work and you need someplace to dye it. So, because you may not, that's a little bit of what I learned from some of this teaching online with other people that I don't know, is that not everybody, and I kind of do know this as well at the same time, not everybody has the luxury of a separate space that they can dedicate to dye work. And I don't have one here in my house. So I'm very, very lucky. And nobody else in the building knows what I'm doing. So, or it's what I do with that space. So, and like I said, I do teach these classes at Vanderbilt, so the students get exposed to all this too. So this is just some basics with this. If you are going to dye wool, you can use Procyon dyes. I'm not sure if I put that on the next slide. You just need to heat them. And you won't use baking soda or soda ash, you will use vinegar. And the baking soda is for cellulose fabrics. And I do my silks in cold water, and I add vinegar instead of soda ash.
Okay.
Wait a minute. So say that again. For silk, you do what?
I substitute soda ash for vinegar. Or I'm sorry, I said it backwards. I use vinegar instead of soda ash. Soda ash is harmful to silk and wool.
And do you heat it then?
The silk, I do not. Some people will tell you you have to heat silk, and that's not true. But you just have to watch what your ingredient is. And people love to say, oh, have you ever tried acid dyes? And I'm like, what do you mean? It's so someone's out there selling probably dyes with dehydrated or powdered vinegar in them, and you can just do it yourself. And I don't know if they have any better color range or type of color out there, but we weren't told to go get acid dyes when it was time to dye silk. We added vinegar in there as well. So yeah, and there's I can't emphasize protective gear enough. You may not need these full-length yellow gloves. These go from your fingertip past your elbows and up onto your forearm. For dyeing with Procyon dyes, you can probably get away with the typical exam gloves or those latex cleaning gloves that go halfway up your forearm, because you're not going to be submerging so much when you use Procyon dyes. But for indigo dyeing or anything that you're going to be reaching down into the bucket, you need these dyer gloves. And my dyer gloves are yellow, but they are now blue from the fingertips up until about half of the length of the glove there. And those are really worth the investment. I get mine at Pro Chemical when I need them. And I think I've inherited a couple of pair as well. So from people bringing their own and then leaving them behind when they leave. Okay, we went over all this. Always sprinkle your powders into the water and slowly, no splashing, please. Slowly to dissolve. This is kind of a basic rule in working with most chemical kind of things that you might use. And I've never seen this happen, but there's a reaction that some chemicals will have if you do the opposite way. So if you put the powder, and why did I not put powder? I put powers. If you put the powder in first and then pour the water on top of it, there's a chemical kind of reaction or a thing, and the whole thing will solidify on you, and then it won't dissolve. And I don't know which chemicals or ingredients do that, so I always use this rule. And we talked about cleanliness. And through the whole, any kind of dyeing process, anything with the rinsing, whatever. And the reason is the gloves are so important is your skin is your largest organ of your body, and it's very absorbent. And from personal experience, all I need is a little drop of the red Procyon dye on a fingertip, and I will have a headache for about 24 hours. For no reason at all. Other colors don't seem to do that to me, but I also don't like going around, I might have worked down in the studio in the morning and then I have to go to a meeting upstairs, and I don't want to have multicolored finger skin or whatever. So Ritaran is a soap with some pumice to it. Gojo makes an orange scented soap that has a pumice to it. Those will help exfoliate the dye off your skin a little bit faster, but that's what you're going to have to wait for to have happen. And please don't wash your hands with Comet trying to get it off. So, and I've seen people do that. Okay, here comes a video. You ready? A video in a video that we're making.
I love the pattern.
That's fun. I can't find how I did that before. So here's that knotting technique that we talked about from without using the popcorn. And I'm going to go through the process, my little interpretation of how to use the Procyon dyes to do this. So there's my white handkerchief or bandana fabric. and my square box of dental floss. I'm probably going to puff up or something that little ghosty shape there. And I don't remember if I drew a line to give me a pattern. Let's see if we see one there. Oh, no, I'm just indicating that I know that I'm going to work from corner to corner. And this is down and dirty, which is how I do demos, so to speak. I'm not necessarily doing my most precise work or careful work. I just want to get you the information so that you can then work carefully and precisely from there. It's sort of like watching paint dry if I was being too methodical. And it's an experiment. I'm going to keep on going on that diagonal. Thank you, David, pointing that out to us. And I'm changing the shapes a little bit of the ghosty forms. I might be changing the width of the band underneath there a little bit. And we saw that in that example, how those different squares were done. And then when you think about something being, you know, in natural dyes, you have to do this part, dye at one time, and then you got to let it cool overnight and dry and all that stuff before you work with it again. So it could be a whole different person doing the next step. Carol Ventura did that crochet workshop, and she talked about how in crochet or knitting, you might be a little more relaxed one day that you're working on a piece and your stitches are nice and even, and you might be stressed out the next day and everything's tight and pulled together and stuff. So I'm just working my way down the line. I'll get there eventually.
Well, and even if you tried really hard to make them all the same, they aren't going to be the same. And that's the beauty of it. Otherwise, it was a machine-made thing that was stamped.
Well, and I've always been proud that you can tell my stuff is handmade. So here I am with my bucket of water. I have my gloves on. I'm going to start with my lightest color first. So here comes a yellow. 1 tablespoon. I don't have quite a bucket of water. I don't even think I have half there because I did, and you'll see my method of madness. The fabric is dampened. And I'm stirring this up, getting as much of it dissolved. It doesn't take much to dissolve it. I stirred with my measuring spoon first and then cleaned it off. I don't know why I do that. Here comes the salt. It's a good idea to not have your fabric in the bucket or the container when you're adding your ingredients. I think I'm indicating that I could take my mask off because I had closed up my dye bath. Here comes the baking soda. So if there was a recipe and it called for 1/2 tablespoon of soda ash, I just put in a whole tablespoon of baking soda. I'll tell you a story after this is over. There's that first sequence of knots. Everything should be dissolved. In goes the water. I just do a little dip to see if I like that kind of tone or shade or value. And then I decide, yes, I do, and plunge it all in there. And it doesn't take very long for that whole piece of fabric to, those cars are parking in that parking lot. They want to get in there for the sale. I think I threw some extra stuff in there. I dye one, yes, that's what I did. Why dye one thing when you can dye multitudes of things?
Is there a maximum depth of color? Like if you left that in there for an hour, would it be deeper color than 5 minutes?
Possibly, and it might depend upon the thread count or the type of yarns that were used to make your fabric. Yeah. So that really absorbent type stuff, leaving it a little bit longer might might have that effect. Okay, so I have taken the yellow fabric out and I didn't change buckets. I just added blue to it. There goes, and I'm adding a little more baking soda and salt. Don't have to do that. It's just a habit now. Stir to dissolve. And I took the yellow fabric and I tied some more knots in there, and now I'm submerging that fabric in there. And I didn't make you watch me tie more knots. I think I went on the other diagonal.
Did you wait till it was dry?
No, that's how down and dirty it is. And this is the shade of green that I'm getting. I love green, so I'm probably going to put 3 or 4 things in this little bucket. Since these aren't they're not really yardage, or so to speak, so I don't need the depth. I mean, I don't need a deep bucket or whatever. So this is the last color. After the green, I tied some more knots. And what did I add? Did anybody see?
No.
I added new black, which will never give you a black, but give you more of a charcoal. Yeah, and if you'll remind me after this to talk about black dye, I'll save you a lot of time and effort. So this is the last color. So I tied white knots, I tied yellow knots, I tied knots on green fabric, and then this is going to create my background. I probably only let it sit in there for 20 minutes. It is for me, it is going to be what it is in this dyeing process with synthetic dyes. I mean, I watched people when I was in school doing dye baths at the same time, and one did it in 20 to 30 minutes, and the other person let their fabric sit for like 4 hours, and they got the same color in the long run. So I'm just showing you the different things that I dyed there. So I was real excited when I was looking through Pro Chemicals dye chart one day, or a list of things, and I saw new black. And I went, aha, they finally figured out, maybe they called it new black because finally figured out how to give us a dye that will actually turn the fabric black. And so I did some fabric in a big dye bath, and I got charcoal. So if you want black fabric, black yarn, black whatever, go to the store and buy it. Because to get black, I will just have to continue. I'll have to do maybe a brown and then another blue, and I might dip it in the indigo bath a couple of times and then come back and see. I mean, you can get a green black and a blue black if you work hard enough, but I just, like, I was really sad because Henry's Attic doesn't have black linen any longer. That's was always part of my weaving process. So, or color selections. So I've never tried to make black, but I know from talking to other people, it's a long kind of tedious process. And why would you do that to yourself? David, why would you do that to yourself? You certainly are welcome to try. This now dries before I cut it open. And so it's been dyed, it's been fully rinsed. I'm still going to wear gloves, I think, when I open this back up. And again, that's a habit. But I also know you might think that your water is running clear, but it's not quite. So I'm also just a little careful about that. It is easier to cut these fabrics open when the fabric is dry. So here we go. Here's the information for working with Procyan dyes. I do soak the silk and the wool in alum and water, and I do it overnight just because it's usually something I do towards the end of my day at Surratt Art Studios, and then I know it's all set and ready for me to come back, work with the next day. You can also do enough overhead and let it ahead of time and let it dry, and the alum is still in the fabric. So if it's 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years later, you can still work with it. I find that with the silk and the wools, the alum helps some of the bonding. It gets the hairs of those fabrics kind of to open up, the scales of the hairs to open up a bit more. And then the rinsing process is a lot easier after that. So I don't feel like I'm washing away a lot of dye when I soak silk and wools. Some of my friends will soak their cottons or plant-based stuff in baking soda before they do their dye baths, but that's like a waste of time because you're going to put it in the dye bath. So, but there might be a technique or two that you might want to do it ahead of time as well. Just depends on what you're working with. I only recently started working with wool and dyeing it, so it has been a fun new experiment. And I even made an indigo vat in a small pot that I can heat up so that I can dye wools that way. And we learned the hard way. Somebody brought wool to cellulose only dye workshop and asked if they could dye it in the cold water, and I said, I don't know what will happen, go ahead. And we thought it was all working, and then they went to rinse it out and it all washed out. So you only have to do that once and you'll never do it again. Any questions on that dye work? I'm going to untie, there is a video of me untying the fabric and revealing.
So when you let it dry and then you cut it open, do you need to wash it then?
I do. Because you just don't know what, let's say something, I just wash it again. That's where I do that's when I do my detergent, my plant-based soap wash. And then depending upon the fabric, I might give it a few minutes in a baking, if it's cellulose, I might give it a few minutes back into a baking soda bath. And if it's silk or wool, I will give it a few minutes in a vinegar bath, just vinegar and water or baking soda and water. And that's just to get the fabric, be sure I've got the fabric back to its proper pH. Because the washing in the soap and the detergent may have changed some of that. And something in the dye process, even though those chemicals were there in the dye process, there may be something else in there that may affect the fabric. And it's also just a good habit. If you do bleach discharge, you want to really wash and rinse that fabric, because the bleach molecules can stay in the fabric and continue to deteriorate it over time. And how do I know this? I've done it. And but we also know that we've washed white underwear in bleach, and over a course of time, all you have left is a waistband. So yeah, that stuff stays in there. So you just never know. So I'm just a little cautious. Am I trying to be archival or have my fabrics last forever? No, but I just don't want to give something to somebody and then have it change on them over time. What else? Any other questions? These are good questions. All right, let's see what happens. Here we go. We're going to untie it. I've got those embroidery scissors with the micro tip. I kind of prefer the seam ripper. It's your choice. I have the exam type, latex or whatever material you like, powdered or not powdered, for you. And you can already see the fabric's dried. And right up there, sort of towards the top there, you can see I've got sort of a suede or change in the coloring there. It's not, I don't have the most even dye job, but again, I did down and dirty kind of quick demo on this so that the video doesn't last forever, or if we were live, you're not sitting there watching me. But this is how, like, this sueded or not dyed well kind of way of doing fabrics was considered a fault if your fabrics turned out this way. And then people like Nancy Crow and some other quilters were looking for fabrics that give them a little more texture in their designs and everything. And all of a sudden, sueded fabrics became the thing to do. So you just never know when the mistake is going to become the thing everybody wants. So I can do some sueded fabrics without any problem. It's fun. So here we go. Oh, why do I have to show you putting on the gloves? Because that's how careful he is. And I kind of like the seam ripper because I'm less, I'm going to start with the scissors though. I'm less likely to cut the fabric or cut a hole in my gloves. Just get under there enough to see that I have the scissors between the fabric and the thread and give a little snip. And then work my way back under there and a little snip. I'm not in any hurry. Sorry for you. Because I can't tell you how many pieces of fabric that I've dyed and then and cut and then put a little hole in it. It's okay. It's a sample. But when you're working on something that means something to you, you want to be careful. Yeah. So I'm just pulling away those layers of wax thread. Oh, look, there's more to cut. And somebody suggested I just pull the fabric and get it to pop off. And that tore the fabric, and I never did that again. And I won't tell you who it is, but I don't listen to them as much anymore.
I'm going to the Santa Fe International Folk Market, Folk
Yes.
Art and Art Market. It'll be interesting to see what the shibori costs.
Yes, and see who's doing it. And if you think about it, just take some pictures of what they're doing. Ask first, but yeah, I'd love to see what's going on. And I've been researching Ghost Ranch and how am I going to get there and when am I going to get there and all that stuff. So sometime next year. All right.
It's very easy to get there by public transportation.
Good, 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 good.
It's much easier than John C. Campbell.
Yeah. All right. Then I switched to the seam ripper. I'm just a little more efficient. I can get more of those layers of thread maybe underneath that needle and then pull to that cutting edge. I still cut a hole in something, but so I'm just randomly, and the whole idea with it, the thing you have to be careful with Procyon dyes is that they will wick or move underneath your resist threads. So that's why I don't do the 2-hour or overnight kind of thing to get a super saturated color. If I wanted a super saturated color, Sarah, I would put more dye into and not add more water.
Because the longer time would allow it more time to seep under?
Yes. With Procyon dyes, there's that yellow.
Yeah.
To the green. So, whoops, sorry. Let me go back. What was I going to tell you? You can buy, yes. So instead of the amount of time, it's your proportion of water and dye. that will give you the color, and then it's the weight of your fabric. So I dyed some sheer scarves when I was first learning all this, and thought I had beautiful, and the fabric's wet, so it deceives you. So I thought I had beautiful gem colors, like deep turquoise and emerald and stuff. And I hung them up to dry, and I came back the next day, and all I had was a bunch of pastels because the fabric was too sheer. And likey pastels. So I had to figure out what to do with them next. I mean, there's a place for them. I'm going to go and speed back up through here because I started all over by interrupting. But wicking is movement of the dye through the fabric, and that is one of the natures of Procyon dye. And natural dyes will do the same thing as well. So you just have to learn your timing. Somebody once asked me for a recipe for my dye bath, and I told them there wasn't a recipe, and they kept asking me during the class for my recipe, and I finally turned around and said 2 tablespoons this and that and 1 gallon of water, and they left me alone, and I was fine. So I don't have recipes for dye work. You can certainly make your own if you want to, but so many other things come into play other than how much dye did you put in or how much water you put in.
Is there a guideline on the Procyon jar?
Yes, it gives you a recipe. I think it's the 2 ounces to 1 gallon of water. You can do 1 teaspoon of salt and baking soda or soda ash and probably be fine. Sometimes, depending upon the process or the fabric, you might add a little more. That's one of the reasons I dip and pull back out, like I did at the beginning with the yellow, is you look at your fabric, and if you give it a little squeeze and get the water out, you get a little closer idea about what your color might be when it dries. It's not a very true test, but it's close. And then you know whether you need to add a little more dye powder or a little more, and you might add a little more salt with soda ash. And the beauty of what I did with this fabric is I did it all in one bucket. So if you set up a table outside and have a 1 gallon bucket, you can dye fabric with this technique. And there, I think I got it. Nope, I still got one more. See the texture, the fabric? Remember from being compressed and tied?
Yeah.
Love that. And you can't quite see like the true width of the bands that were created. And so that's where pressing the fabric or ironing it will bring a little bit more to it. I think just hang drying this fabric after I rinsed it again, most of it flatten out. I'm not known for ironing.
So there's some white circles there. Those were the first ones, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot about that part. Yes. So I I tied up the white, and then I put it in the yellow, and then I tied up the yellow, and then I had added the blue to turn it green, and then I tied up the green fabric, and then I stopped tying and I put in that new black, which is charcoal, and I got a gray background. So I did 3 colors. There they are.
That's great.
And look at that little blurb there.
Yeah.
Little double one. I think I know what I did. But I haven't recreated it to see that I can. But at first I was like, oh no, I did it wrong. And then I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I live for anomaly. So for that to show up in this piece, yay for me. And I have clean gloves. Yay. I don't know why I showed that either, but okay. And because it was dry, I was able to bring it home and do this work. And the washing I can do in my laundry sink, that last rinse or whatever. Okay. Any questions before we move on?
Nope.
It's fun. That was a very, very fun little experiment that I can't wait to do with larger pieces of fabric. All right, so here's the ever elusive and very, very popular indigo. I'm growing some in a pot in my front garden. So
Did you know that at John C. Campbell, they have a dye garden now and they're
do
growing
they?
them.
I can't wait to see that. Cassie Dixon, when she was here for her spinning workshop, gave us all some of the Japanese indigo. And she pointed out, I don't know that I've ever heard anybody else say this, not all indigo flowers have what it takes to make indigo dye. So there are different species or whatever you might call them out there. So the Japanese, or just making sure that maybe the person you got the seeds from has made their own indigo from it before. Even for that fresh leaf printing techniques, you need to make sure that you have an indigo plant that actually has the dye in it. And I think in the Latin name of the species, the word indigo will show up when you're looking at it. But if you just pick up a packet of seeds that says indigo on it, you might not get what you want to. I've never gone through the process of, because this is my first time growing it, I've never gone through the process of actually taking the plant and processing it. There's some good videos on YouTube that show that in a country like India or Southeast Asia, somewhere else maybe. And it is quite fascinating to watch. And it's a beautiful plant too. So I'm hoping with the seeds that I had that I will just do some of that eco dye printing with them and see what happens from there. That's my only goal. So remember that big complex for the synthetic? All right. Well, I know hydrogen and nitrogen and oxygen. And this is all that there is to the indigo molecule. And the indigo molecule was the first one recreated or reproduced in a laboratory setting in like the late early 1900s. So because it was so large and simple, it was easy for them to recreate. I don't know what does what in there, because in an indigo vat, whether it's heat or cold water, there are other ingredients in there. The indigo itself doesn't typically show up all by itself. So it needs some help. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. It needs other things to help it. Oh, here's information. Things that you can come back to when you watch the video and pause if you would like. A real key thing, and one of the reasons that I don't grow and make my own, and it is being farmed, indigo is being farmed in Tennessee once again, and it was a big money maker during the plantation life of the South. And as with anything, rice, sugar, indigo, tobacco, the plantation owners found those people from Africa who already had these skills and brought them over to make it happen on their plantations. So, or even just get the advice. I mean, you have to have a lot of water to do rice. So if you were in Virginia, you might not be successful as a rice farmer, and they would be able to have told people that. But instead of natural indigo dye, most of it is synthetic. And that's, again, partly because it's so easy to reproduce. And I will go ahead and tell you I've done both, and I can't tell the difference in anything. Way that it works. So in my busy life, I now use what is called a pre-reduced synthetic indigo dye. And I buy that at Pro Chemical. And instead of having to go through a bunch of steps like a recipe, it's like making a cake from scratch, since I love food so much. This is a dump and pour recipe straight out of the box, and it saves me time. And when I go to do a 3-day workshop, I need everything to go well. And one of the first things we do is mix the pre-reduced synthetic indigo into our container. It's going to sit for about 4 to 6 hours or overnight. And then and while we're all stitching, it's getting ready. And then the next day we start dyeing. And then whenever I'm around some of those people who think that natural is the only way to go, I don't tell them I use synthetic.
So your big indigo vat at the studio, is that pre-reduced?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I just took their basic kit, and I think I put the whole kit in. So it has the soda ash and gosh, now I've just went blank on the other ingredients. That kit gives you your pre-reduced indigo. They've done this stuff with and this is another reason I like the pre-reduced, because a lot of these recipes have lye in them. So you're handling and working with a caustic material. So, and I don't want to do that. So that part's already in what looks like the indigo powder, done for you. I think it's 60% pre-reduced. And I have no idea how they do this. And then they give you the soda ash and some synthropol and some metaphos, I think, to put in the water. And you just follow their simple instructions, like a, dump and pour. You don't have to have anything extra on hand. But what I do is I think the kit makes 2 5-gallon vats, or 5-gallon buckets. So it's really 3 gallons of water. So let's call it 8 gallons from one kit by putting both of them in there. And then you can buy just the pre-reduced indigo, nothing else. And so I have a big container of that. And once I set up the indigo vat, it's been a while since I've had to do it. And I test the color, then I might add some more pre-reduced. And then in the dyeing process, you're sucking out, so to speak, or absorbing the indigo and the chemistry from the dye bath. So you're always recharging it. So if you're going to maintain it and keep it going.
Yeah.
Right now she's asleep. So I will have to add a little bit of everything to wake her back up, and then wait overnight, come back and see what happens.
Okay.
And I do remember growing up, my father was in the textile industry, worked his way up the corporate ladder, and he landed a job for a number of years with Bluebell in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they made Wrangler jeans. And when I got involved in theater, a community group for high school and college students, our rehearsal space was right across from the denim mill, and we always knew which day the fabrics were being dyed because the whole neighborhood smelled like dead fish. So it's not the most pleasant smell in the world, and people will often come by and say, "Have you been doing that dye thing again?" Because they can smell it when they're walking down the hall. It's not that offensive, but it's an odd odor. And I guess it makes people inquisitive, just like when you think you smell smoke from the ceiling overhead. There it is, and it's what they call the crystal form. It's not a true crystal in the sense of what comes out of the ground, but it has been processed and worked through a series of water type baths and things so that it becomes this crystal, and then you grind it. And I have some crystals somewhere, I have to find where they are, and then you grind it into a powder if you're doing it yourself, Or you can buy the powdered form as well if you want to do the natural stuff. And everything in the synthetic kit is powder form. This is a range of color that you can create from your indigo vat. And so you might hear sometimes a little bit about white shibori. That can refer to working on this lightest part of the color spectrum here. It may also refer to the way that you resist the indigo dye. But there's that almost blue-black that you can achieve. I call it a midnight blue, as opposed to a true black. But that is about the color that I'm happy with when I'm dyeing my artwork or shibori pieces. I have played with the other ranges there in the middle, the medium part, but I really live for that dark midnight blue color. It takes a while to get it there.
So are you going to tell us how you get it from the light to the dark?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
You want to know that now?
No, I just wanted to be sure that you covered that.
Well, I tell you. So let's pretend, see this lightest color here to the left? Let's pretend that's my one skein of yarn that I'm dyeing, and that is its first dip. So when I bring it out of the indigo vat, that's what my yarn would look like.
And how long have you just dipped it and brought it out, or do you?
I have dipped it and probably counted to 45.
Okay.
Like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Yeah. You can set a timer. I think I still have an old egg timer, or I can tell my phone to do 45 seconds for me. But it's kind of a meditative process if you just breathe and count while you're doing the dyeing. And then you have this magic thing that happens, and you're going to see that process. So that could be the first dip. I do more than one dip, but if I want it, because indigo rubs off, because it's a layering process and not a that's the type of bonding you're getting, is a layering bond. So I might count 30 seconds and do it 2 or 3 times just to secure that bonding, and get this very light color. Then I've decided I don't want a light color. So I let it dry in between each dip for about 15 minutes. And let's go to that lighter color that's in that medium kind of blue that's in the middle there. So now I've taken that same skein of yarn and I've dipped it 2 or 3 more times for about 30 to 45 seconds. And after I've let it dry overnight, I come back and I have this color. And I go, well, that's not the blue I want. And so I take that same skein again and I dip it 3 or 4 more times, and I start to get towards the dark blues that we see there. So 3, 6, maybe 9 to 12 dips in the indigo vat is what it might take to get to that dark blue. And it also depends upon how much indigo is actually in the vat. So if I've done a lot of dyeing, let's say I've done 10 yards of fabric in my indigo vat, and then I take this skein and I'm trying to get to the dark blue, I might have exhausted the indigo and not get there, even with that 12 dips.
Does the dye vat look different after? Does it physically pull out the dye so it looks clearer or more?
No, it actually does pull out the dye, yes, but the indigo vat itself never looks clear.
Okay.
Does
it look different than when you first poured it in? I mean,
yes.
Can you see that it's the dye is leaving?
Yes. Well, what will happen most of the time is that the indigo vat will go out of reduction. And you'll see this. So I do a little color, I cut up little squares of fabric. Maybe they're 3 by 3 or 4 by 4. And I keep a little Ziploc of them near the indigo vat. And if I haven't been dyeing for a while, or I've woke her back up again, or I'm teaching a class and everybody's been in there. I use one of those squares to test how the indigo vat is. And I have a little cheat method too that I think I do in my video. So when I put the little piece of fabric into the indigo vat and bring it back out, it's going to go from a yellow to a green to a blue when it's exposed to the oxygen. And that tells me that the indigo is in reduction. If I put the piece of fabric in there and when I bring it back out and open it up, it's just a dull blue-gray kind of color, it's not in reduction. And so I have to put the thiox, that's the other chemical, the thiox and the soda ash in, and possibly some more indigo. And then I have to wait a few hours.
When you say it's in reduction, what does that mean?
There's no oxygen in the indigo vat. Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
It's like magic.
It is.
So is what you want for it to go from the yellow, green, blue, or do you want it to be the blue from the beginning?
I want it to go from the yellow to the green to the blue.
Okay.
That's the reduction. That indicates that indigo is in reduction. The vat is in reduction. And where the bonding happens is not inside the indigo vat. You're putting a layer of indigo and chemistry onto your fabric or your yarn. And when you bring it back up and expose it to oxygen, the oxygen creates the bonding.
Oh,
I know.
my.
It's like watching a Polaroid
Wow.
pop out of your camera, and then it goes from that, what was it, sort of a white thing to ghost-like images and colors, and then they start getting clearer and clearer. It's like that. It's just a little faster than that.
So that when you pull it out and it's yellow, it's response to the oxygen in the air, and that's what turns it the colors?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Because again, all you're doing is getting chemistry onto your fabric and the indigo dye. But like I said, I can't just grind up some indigo and put it in water like I did the Procyon, because it won't do anything. It has to ferment. So the story that I was told so long ago was that the way that someone figured out that plant would make blue is that most people had fabrics that were just the natural color of their homespun yarn, which meant there was a lot of beige out in the world. And so someone was walking from one village to another and decided to sit down and take a little rest. And he or she sat down on some rotted indigo flowers. Don't know what caused them to rot or anything like that. And so he sat on that. And then when he stood up, it exposed that rotting material on his pants to the oxygen, and it turned blue. And when he got to the village, somebody said, "Hey, what's that on the back of your pants?" And then they eventually figured out what had happened. That sounds like something from Grimm's fairy tales or whatever. But we know that most things that we take for granted, somebody stumbled upon.
Yeah.
Like penicillin, they were looking for something else and they found penicillin. So, or whatever.
Yeah, goats discovered coffee.
Yes.
The goats noticed that the goats are.
Yes, and that's that whole thing of, if you watch things going on in nature, you'll figure out something for yourself. And everything we need is in nature somewhere. We just have to figure out how to get to it. Aspirin comes from a plant, originally. So, yeah. So I do like natural kind of stuff and everything, but I also, I'm lucky there's 2 walnut trees growing behind this building where I work. So I have a ready source of that every time I want to do some walnut dye. And walnut and indigo go well together. So they're a lot of fun. So here's what you need for an indigo vat. You don't have to write this down or anything. You can, if you do a small indigo vat, that 5-gallon one, you can work it and exhaust it. I think you can do up to about 7 yards of fabric. That doesn't mean everything's going to be the darkest blue. Because you're using a small amount of water and the amount of chemistry that they told you to measure out of the kit, you are going to get a pretty dark blue right away. But don't be deceived. You still need to do 2 or 3 dips to guarantee that that's going to hold for a while. You can then sort of, what would be the word? Not turn it off, but you can, before you dispose of the indigo vat, if you pour vinegar in it, it will dilute it out and make it safe to pour down the drain, or if you're not living near water, rivers or creeks or whatever, you can pour it in your backyard if you want to. Your plants might like it, but don't quote me on that one. But most of us keep the indigo vat as if it was a pet, and we refer to it being alive. We refer to feeding it when it needs to be put back into reduction. We use the word feed. I've named mine, as I think I've told you already, and even have a picture of Madge the garbage heap on my indigo vat. It should have the poison skull symbol on there instead, but nobody does it. And I have a lid for it, and then I also put a sheet of plastic between that lid and the indigo vat, and I let that sheet of plastic touch the surface of the indigo vat to keep as much oxygen out of there as I can. And because it is a 30-gallon trash can, I put that sheet of plastic there so that nobody walks by and throws their lunch into my indigo, or what's left over of their lunch into my indigo vat. So it's kind of a double whammy thing there. You do want something tall and cylindrical, as opposed to a wide open bucket or one of those rectangular plastic bins that you can buy. And because you have to gently stir the indigo vat, especially before you use it the first time, there's sediment that collects on the bottom. So you don't want one of those buckets that may have a ridge or things that bump up in there, because they get in the way of you stirring it.
When you say you feed it, are you feeding it with more dye?
Sometimes it's more indigo, but usually if it's out of reduction, I'm feeding it some thiox.
Okay.
And thiox is what puts it, we know it as a color remover or a discharge chemical, but it actually puts the indigo vat into reduction. I think it also does some color removal in there as well, but don't quote me on that. I suspect it. And if you want to do wool in particular, you're going to need the typical natural dye things of a burner. I use an electric burner and an enamel or metal pot with a lid. The lid again is to keep the oxygen out of the vat. The hot water ones don't last. I haven't really been able to keep it as a pet. I kind of work it, exhaust it, and it's a small pot, so it doesn't matter. But I don't pour everything out. I just add to it and recharge it, so to speak. But I don't think about keeping it alive. And I keep a thermometer that has a long enough stem that I can put it into the vat, because you want to maintain about a 98-degree temperature, I think it is. And so getting too hot or not hot enough with the indigo will affect that as well. I've never had to worry about the the room temperature for my cold water vat, but I do know artists that had studios like in Boston and had no heat. And so they put an electric blanket around their indigo vat to keep it warm during the winter. Some people will only do an indigo vat during the warmer seasons wherever they live, and then put the thing to sleep or throw it out or dispose of it properly.
So for the cold water indigo,
Mhm.
room temperatures though, I mean, it's summertime, it's gonna be 80s and 90s.
That's not too hot for it.
Okay.
If you're going to do it outside or keep it in your garage. But
Is
just
it
kind of have something if you're keeping it in the garage, then and it's going to stay any longer than, let's say, a long weekend, have a thermometer in there that you can at least tell whether it's getting hot in the garage or hotter than 90 degrees.
What's the temperature range?
My room is fairly well air conditioned, and it's like 70 or 72 degrees. And from what I've read, maybe mine shouldn't work at that temperature, but it does.
But so then what's too hot?
Probably mid to upper 90s.
Oh, okay.
Over a length of time. If you build a 5-gallon vat to use in your backyard for a weekend, you're probably not going to see any or have any problem with it, with the cold water vat. And anytime something stops working, then you have to figure out what is the one thing that it might be. So in this case, it would be, oh, it got too hot. And so we need to maybe move it somewhere cooler. I know that you don't want them to freeze. I don't think you can revive them after that point. If it gets too hot, you may also not be able to revive it. So, but if it's a 5-gallon bucket and three gallons of water, I think the kits are about $17 and you get 2 dye baths out of them. So it's not a huge expense if something did happen to it. It might just stop what you had planned to do. But I've never had any trouble. But like I said, it's in a environment that it seems to like, and it's flourishing, if that's the right word, although it's not doing anything. So, and I've also let it go like 9 months to a year before I use it again, and I wake it back up and it's fine. So if you have a space, it's kind of nice to have it around. And if you want to do big pieces of fabric, you need the 30-gallon trash can size. There's more things that you need. The distilled white vinegar, it does seem to help set the indigo dye and keep it from rinsing out of the fabric. But anything that didn't bond to your fabric during that oxygenation period that you gave it, which is exposing it to air and then letting it have at least 15 minutes before you dye it again, anything that didn't bond to your fabric is going to wash out, just like any other kind of dye. So I don't really buy the whole idea that white vinegar sets a dye, but it does seem to help a little bit in the process. Same kind of thing, especially with the respirator. You have chemicals that are in powder form. You don't want to breathe them, and you don't want them to be absorbed through your skin. And like I said, there's some lye and other caustic materials in that pre-reduced powder if you decide to try the one that I use. Or you're going to be using them yourself, so you need to be very careful. I still use bleach to clean up things, even though it's indigo, but because bleach will wash that away pretty well. Anything on here that seems odd or unusual?
Mhm.
Okay.
And why do you need the full-length gloves?
Because I'm going to be reaching down into the bucket and getting the fabric or the yarn in the middle of it. And so, and in a third world, I hate to use that term, but I don't remember what else we're supposed to say. In a third world country, you know who the indigo dyers are because they're walking around with blue hands or blue feet. And they actually dig holes in the ground and do their indigo vats there, or some of them do. But I just don't want blue hands. And I think this is not necessarily so much, well, it is partly exfoliating, but you're going to have to wait for it to rub off your skin as well, which might take a little more time.
Well, 7 days, you get a new layer of skin, so.
Yeah. So, and depending upon how much you absorbed or how
Yeah.
well it bonded, might take a little more time from there. All right. I think Madge is the name of the oracle in Fraggle Rock. I call mine Midge. So, and I may have it all confused. I'm no good with names anyway. So here we go with the video. I do believe. Yes. So that was the thiox. I have really, really, really super hot water in the studios because we're connected to the dishwashing system upstairs in the cafeteria. So it's a little easier for me to get the thiox to dissolve. But you want a small pot that you can dedicate to this. There's that hot water that I was referring to. Those sanitation temperatures. You will probably need a small pot and that you can dedicate to using for dye chemistry and dissolve the thiox over. You don't have to bring it to a boil, but it doesn't dissolve as easily as the salt in the baking soda will. And you want as much of it to dissolve into the water, which you're going to put into the indigo vat, because then you don't have. Oh, wonder what that was. You don't have the salts floating around in the. They won't dissolve on their own in the indigo vat. See that sort of green, that filminess that can be referred to, and sometimes it looks more like a flower. That is some indigo floating on the top. And I'm trying to do this and hold the camera at the same time. So I'm sorry for the Bell Witch type photography. So I'm going to take that film or that flower. I never really get a flower. She's been sitting a long time before I woke her up. So this film took a little bit to dissolve. The camera is deceiving you. I am stirring really slowly in a spiral direction. And then I spiral back the opposite way in slow motion because I don't want to do any splish splashing because that brings oxygen into the indigo vat. So I think when I edited this, what little bit of editing I could do, I think I may have sped up the speed of the film there. This is my cheat method for finding out. I learned this from somebody else. I can just take a white plastic spoon and get it just under the surface. And if the solution looks yellow, then I don't have to add the thiox. It's in reduction. I got a bluish kind of color. And so I slowly sink the container into the indigo vat. And it's deceiving. It looks like I'm splashing it back out, but I'm not really. So I've submerged the container, let the solution find its way into the indigo vat, and then give it that gentle stir again.
It looks like it's changing color. The vat is changing.
And that might be the lighting because it's usually not that fast of a process. Because what I did was after I stirred it, I put the plastic back over it, pressed it down against the surface of the water, and put her lid back on.
Mm.
And then I came back 4 to 6 hours, or knowing me, it was the next day. They usually stays in reduction for 3 to 4. I've sometimes had it stay in reduction for 5 to 7 days. So all the being careful stuff is just so that I get the longest amount of time with the indigo vat before it goes out of reduction, but it's going to go out regardless, because I think that water attracts oxygen or something, and so but it just finds its way out of reduction, and you put it back in and move forward. And I'm a little longer with my times that I might need to be. When I say 4 to 6 hours or overnight, this is something again that I might do at work before I leave for the day, knowing that I'm ready to dye fabric the next day. When I come back in and I have anything that needs to soak in alum, or even just soak in plain water, I have that set up for me, so that it's sort of one of those things, almost like cleaning your studio when you leave, so that you walk into a clean studio. I'm going to walk in the next day with everything ready for me to do what I want to do, which is dye fabric. Okay, ask the Oracle. Yes. So a little more of the testing, and then we actually get to see the Fraggle puppets always went to the Oracle to ask a question to solve a problem. And I very often, did I not hit play? Yes, I did. That's just a really long. So here I come back the next day. Now, hopefully you see some changes in the surface that are indicating it's way more yellowy green. And it can be deceiving. I can take the plastic off and think everything's okay, but I always do my test. See the blue swirls? That's some of the indigo that didn't dissolve, and it floated back up to the surface. So I'm stirring gently. I'm touching the bottom of the container as well to stir up some of that scum. And the middle of your indigo vat is the sweet spot. So you don't want to dye too close to the surface, and you don't want to have something too big that then, and here comes that test. And see the yellowy green? Yes, we're in reduction. I don't even have to test a piece of fabric now. But here I go, I will do one. And I'm not going to move my thumb and my index finger. So I'm doing this a little bit wrong. I would usually have it hidden in my hand, but I'm holding a camera. I would have it hidden in both hands, but I'm holding a camera. And it's still going to work. And that's, is 3 inches by 3 inches of fabric. Who cares if it's not quite right?
So right now it's submerged in the water.
Yes, and you can't quite tell, but that blue line of my gloves is somewhere around my elbows. So that's how far into the indigo that I am. And I'm waving it slowly. See that bubble? Oh, no bubbles, please. I'm waving it very gently back and forth, just like laundry on a nice spring afternoon with the breeze blowing. I should gather it back up into my hands and hide it before bringing it up, but I don't think, oh, I can. Good. And see it yellowy? And then it turns green. And the more I open it up, you have to open up whatever you can to expose it to the oxygen. And that's hard to do with one hand. And there's my fingerprint, that little white area that you might see. And I'm going to set it up so that once I put it in the water, it'll open up more. It's still getting exposed to oxygen, even though I'm rinsing it. And this is my reclaim bucket. So any indigo that did not bond to the fabric there in the oxygen part, I'm going to reclaim and use it later. See how blue it turned? And I am, if I remember right, I am working my way. And remember, it's wet, so it's deceiving. Wet fabric is always deceiving. Oh, I did not show you my fingerprint. This is the plexiglass circles that I was telling you about. And that's a fold and clamp technique. Just to encourage you to think about other techniques maybe, but also it's really easy to fold and clamp a piece of fabric and dye it for you than for me. And I had a limited amount of time on making these videos originally, so I didn't have time to finish all that stitch work on a sample and get it tied up. And again, I'm holding the camera in one hand. I'm doing a little better job this time.
And how long do you think you're in the water? In
30 to 45 seconds.
That's right. Yeah.
I think the longest I've heard anybody do is 90 seconds, and then you're just wasting your time. Because you're only going to get X amount on there and nothing past that. And if I'm building for that dark blue, that's when I might start with 30 or 40 seconds on those initial layers of colors. But the more I get going with it, see how the plexiglass shows you the resist? That's all it took, was clamping a circle of plexiglass on. The indigo cannot get through the plastic plexiglass or under it. It is getting a little bit under it because it's not totally clamped, but that's how this works. And I'm going to pause here because so the wonderful student not only gave me plexiglass circles, but they gave me different sizes.
Oh, wow.
So I started with the largest size in what you just saw. And then I went to the next size and I dipped it again. And I got that lighter blue there. And let me think if I have a third circle. So this is how you can play with those value ranges, all on one piece of fabric. So that I can have the light, the medium, and the darkest all in one. Let's see if I did do a third. I can't remember. Yes, I did. There it is. Teeny tiny little circle in the center. And so I dipped it. So now I've got a light blue, a medium blue, and a dark blue. And I love drama. What is it? What is that about? I forget. Any questions there? It's fascinating stuff. I love indigo. I just think it's amazing. My favorite color is green, but I love indigo. Oh. The big reveal must be in the next week.
Oh, okay.
Because that needed to dry, I think. And I need for you to come back. That's what it is. Because what happens next week is we talk about the last part of the process, which is the untie the fabrics, which we did a little bit of course, and then the washing and rinsing and drying again. There may be a little more information in there. Next week is not as long as these other weeks have been. I do promise you that, because we all know how to wash and dry fabric. but there's some more information there. When I have a group of people in, and whether they're there for one night a week for 10 weeks or a weekend workshop, I tell them to go dye their fabrics every 15 minutes. I wait an hour in between dips, and I will do 2 or 3 maybe a day, and then I let the piece hang on the drying rack overnight. I usually hang it by its threads when it's stitched pieces or knotted, so that the whole piece of fabric is floating in the drying rack and everything is being exposed to oxygen. So the longer that it sits and is exposed to oxygen, the more successful bonding you will have. I think I'm pushing it a little bit, but it just makes me, it also kind of fits with my work life as well, because I can, let's say I can dip a piece of fabric a couple of times and then go teach a class for a couple hours and then come back and dip it some more. It does take, I don't think I've ever gotten to dark blue in just one day. Some people push it to an even more extreme. I think it was Mary's, is it Sycophus? Yes.
Yeah.
I think she dyes her indigo and gets it to the right color, and then it sits in a paper bag under a table for a year before she ever uses it. And I don't really know what that's about either, but if it works for her, and she's way more famous than I am, so and does beautiful work, so hooray for her. There's also this whole thing of soak it in soy milk afterwards, and I don't know what that's about. If I thought I needed it, or I needed to leave it sitting in a paper bag for a year, I would, but I don't think that's necessary. So there are people out there that are more extreme about their time than even I am. But a minimum of 15 minutes. The nice thing about that is it's still damp, so you don't have to re-wet it every time. You can just go ahead and go back into the indigo vat. When I do come back the next day, the fabric is dry, so I then have to, I usually have one bucket, a 1 gallon bucket as a reclaim, and I have a 1 gallon bucket as a just a basic soak. But eventually they all become the same kind of thing. That makes sense.
So if it were dry, if you wait a couple hours and it's dry, you soak it in water first before you stick it in the vat?
Yes. And it doesn't have to be very long. It's not a wet it out overnight thing like you might have to with wool, because these are cotton or silk fabrics. They're gonna wet up pretty quickly. And I've done the alum thing with silk, and it may start being released from the fabric or whatever. I don't have to redo the alum again, because it's gotten the silk to whatever texture it needs to be. And that's real subtle. You don't even see or notice the difference between the two. It just, in the end results, and the more you work with it, you might go, oh, that was worth it after all. That overnight soak in the alum. And overnight to me is like foolproof, as opposed to, and there's so many different hours or timings on a lot of these things, processes that you will work with. Overnight, there's no question whether it was in there long enough or not. So that's why I usually do an overnight. And I don't think I've ever cheated that. I've never found myself in a place where it's like, I've got 15 minutes and they're going to be here. I need to soak this kind of thing. So yeah, I try to stay ahead, either with my own work or if I'm teaching it live, that everything's ready ahead of time. Yeah, good. Any questions from there? All right. Now, after you go, I get to figure out how to find this recording. And then you'll get an email and it'll be like, oh, shoot. Or, hey, I found it. But I have my own Zoom account, so it should show up in there. Because I noticed when I was looking through the Guild's Zoom account that there was such a thing there. So hopefully it's easy breezy. And I'll put it on a YouTube channel, I think is where I can send it. Okay. All right.
Thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. I love spending time with you both, and I'll see you next week then.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.